Everyone watched in shock when Zoe Washington reached out to admire the gleaming red Ferrari parked outside Bergdorf Goodman. A furious billionaire in an expensive suit stormed over, shouting at her to step away from his car. He had no idea who she was or what she could do. What happened next would silence every assumption, shatter every prejudice, and leave the city's most arrogant CEO stunned beyond belief. Because sometimes the person you least expect holds the exact solution you desperately need. Before we start, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's continue. The November morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, casting long shadows across the marble floors of Nathaniel Brooks' Manhattan penthouse. At 38, he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, his perfectly tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit emphasizing his broad shoulders and lean build. His dark brown hair was styled to perfection, and his piercing blue eyes surveyed his domain with the cold calculation of a man who'd built a tech empire worth $12 billion. But this morning, his attention wasn't on quarterly reports or board meetings. It was on the 5 automotive masterpieces arranged in his private garage, a collection that represented more than mere transportation. They were his sanctuary, his escape from the hollow echoes of a penthouse that money had filled with everything except companionship. Mr. Brooks. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your driver is waiting downstairs. Nathaniel ran his fingers along the scarlet hood of his most prized possession, a 2023 Ferrari SF90 Stradale, one of only 5 specially manufactured worldwide. The car's hybrid V8 engine was a work of art, its carbon fiber body gleaming under the garage's LED lighting. This wasn't just a vehicle, it was his meditation, his therapy, his connection to something pure in a world that had taught him to trust only money and power. His phone buzzed. Another dating app notification. Another woman interested in his bank account rather than his soul. With a disgusted swipe, he deleted it. At 38, he'd learned that his wealth was both a blessing and a curse. It brought him everything he wanted except the one thing he needed most, someone who saw him as more than a dollar sign. The irony wasn't lost on him. Nathaniel Brooks, the man who'd revolutionized social media connectivity, lived in complete isolation. Meanwhile, across the city in Long Island City, Queens, the sound of precision tools echoed through Washington Auto Restoration. Zoe Washington, 28 years old and 5 feet 6 inches of focused determination, slid out from beneath a midnight blue Lamborghini Huracan, her coffee-colored skin glistening with a light sheen of perspiration. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her bright orange coveralls were stained with the honest marks of her craft. Her grandmother always said she had magic hands, and looking at the Lamborghini's perfectly purring engine, Zoe knew it was true. She'd just completed a transmission rebuild that 3 other mechanics had deemed impossible. The car's owner, a famous rapper, would never know that the woman who'd saved his $200,000 investment had learned her trade from her father in a 1-car garage in Brooklyn. Zoe, called her assistant Marcus, from the front office. That was Mr. Chun from Exclusive Auto Services. He's got another emergency job. She wiped her hands on a clean rag, her movements precise and practiced. Zoe Washington wasn't just any mechanic. She was the mechanic, the one called when Bugattis broke down, when Ferraris failed, when McLarens needed miracles. Her client list read like a who's who of celebrities, athletes, and titans of industry, yet most of them never knew her name. They just knew that when their million-dollar machines needed saving, there was only one person who could do the impossible. The workshop around her was her kingdom. Vintage Ferrari posters covered the walls, and every tool had its place. This was where she felt most herself, not fighting against assumptions about what a young black woman could or couldn't do, but simply being the best at what she loved. But success in her world came with a price. Dating was nearly impossible. Men either felt threatened by her expertise or fetishized her uniqueness. She'd learned to build walls around her heart as skillfully as she built engines, protecting herself from those who couldn't see past their own limitations. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, calling her to meet for lunch at their favorite spot in Manhattan. Zoe smiled, her first genuine expression of joy all morning. Sometimes the best medicine for loneliness was a good friend and a change of scenery. She changed out of her coveralls into a stunning emerald green blouse and dark jeans. The city hummed around them, 8 million people living their separate lives, unaware that two hearts were about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most extraordinary love stories. The crisp November air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts as Zoe walked down Fifth Avenue toward Bergdorf Goodman, where she was meeting her best friend Kelly for their monthly lunch date. The afternoon sun painted the sidewalk in golden hues, and she found herself admiring the elegant storefronts that lined Manhattan's most prestigious shopping district. That's when she saw it. Parked directly in front of the luxury department store sat the most breathtaking machine she'd ever laid eyes on, a Ferrari SF90 straight ale in a shade of red so deep it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Zoe stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She'd worked on Ferraris before, but never one of these. This was automotive poetry, a hybrid masterpiece that represented the pinnacle of Italian engineering. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her voice filled with the same reverence others might reserve for a Monet or a Beethoven symphony. She approached slowly, her trained eye immediately recognizing the subtle modifications that set this apart from a standard SF90. The carbon fiber spoiler had been custom-shaped, the brake calipers were a unique shade of gold, and the interior, what she could glimpse through the windows, featured hand-stitched leather in a pattern she'd never seen before. Unable to resist, Zoe gently placed her palm against the hood, feeling the residual warmth from the engine. Her fingers traced the aerodynamic curves with the delicate touch of someone who understood that she was in the presence of greatness. "The hybrid system in this beauty," she murmured to herself, V8 twin-turbo paired with 3 electric motors. 986 horsepower of pure artistry. She knelt down to examine the front air intakes, noting the precision of the design. Every angle, every curve had been calculated to maximize performance while maintaining the distinctive Ferrari elegance. This wasn't just transportation. This was a work of art that happened to have wheels. "Excuse me. Excuse me." The voice cut through her admiration like a blade. Zoe looked up to see a tall man in an expensive suit striding toward her, his face twisted with fury. Even from a distance, she could see the rage burning in his blue eyes. Nathaniel Brooks had just exited Bergdorf Goodman after a frustrating meeting with his lawyer about a business acquisition. His mood was already sour when he spotted someone touching his most prized possession. But when he saw that it was a young black woman in casual clothes, every prejudice his privileged upbringing had instilled came rushing to the surface. "Get your hands off my car," he shouted, his voice carrying across the busy sidewalk and causing several well-dressed shoppers to turn and stare. "What do you think you're doing?" Zoe straightened immediately, her hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "I'm sorry, I was just admiring." "Admiring?" Nathaniel's voice dripped with disdain as he reached her, standing uncomfortably close. "You were putting your hands all over a vehicle worth more than most people make in a lifetime. Do you have any idea what you could have damaged?" The condescension in his tone hit Zoe like a physical blow. She'd experienced this before, the assumption that because of her appearance, she couldn't possibly understand or appreciate something of value. But it never stopped hurting. "Sir, I wasn't trying to damage anything," she said, keeping her voice calm despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I was simply appreciating the craftsmanship. This is an extraordinary machine." "Extraordinary machine?" Nathaniel laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Lady, this is a Ferrari SF90 straight ale. One of 5 custom models in existence. The carbon fiber alone costs more than your annual salary. You shouldn't even be breathing near it." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Zoe felt the weight of their stares, the whispered assumptions about what was happening. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but beneath that, anger was building. "I understand exactly what this car is," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I can see the custom modifications, the upgraded suspension, the bespoke interior. I know what I'm looking at. Oh really? Nathaniel's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Let me guess, you watch a lot of Fast and Furious movies? Think that makes you an expert. The racist undertone wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. This was Manhattan, where minding your own business was an art form. Zoe's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every instinct told her to walk away, to preserve her dignity by refusing to engage. But something about his smug assumption that she was ignorant made her stand her ground. Actually, she said, her voice steady as steel, I think the real question is whether you understand what you own. Because looking at your car, I can see at least 3 issues that are going to cause you serious problems. Nathaniel's expression faltered for just a moment. What are you talking about? The brake fluid reservoir is low. I can tell by the way the car is sitting. Your left rear tire has uneven where that suggests an alignment issue. And there's a slight discoloration around your exhaust that indicates your hybrid system isn't calibrating properly. She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the final blow. But I'm sure someone who truly knows cars would have noticed those things already. For a heartbeat, Nathaniel was speechless. Then his anger returned with double the intensity, fueled now by embarrassment at being shown up by someone he dismissed. Listen, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but... His phone rang, interrupting his tirade. The screen displayed Exclusive Auto Services, the premium shop that maintained his entire collection. Frustrated, he answered without taking his eyes off Zoe. What? He barked into the phone. Mr. Brooks, this is urgent, came the voice of Mr. Chun, the service manager. Your Ferrari is showing critical system alerts. We need to get our specialist to you immediately. There's a hybrid calibration issue that could cause catastrophic engine failure. Nathaniel's face went pale. He looked at his car, then at Zoe, who was watching him with an expression that was equal parts vindication and pity. How soon can your specialist get here? He asked, his voice suddenly much quieter. She's actually in Manhattan right now. I can have her to you within the hour. Her name is Zoe Washington. She's the only one we trust with vehicles of this caliber. The phone slipped from Nathaniel's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the sidewalk. He stared at Zoe, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, as the full weight of his assumptions crashed down around him. Zoe calmly picked up his phone and handed it back to him, her touch gentle despite everything he'd just put her through. I believe, she said softly, that would be me. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, sensing the drama was over. But for Nathaniel and Zoe, it was just beginning. They stood there on Fifth Avenue, the autumn wind swirling around them, 2 people whose worlds had just collided in the most unexpected way. Nathaniel's carefully constructed reality, where money equaled worth and appearance indicated capability, lay in ruins at his feet. And Zoe, despite her anger and hurt, found herself looking at this arrogant man and seeing something else beneath the surface. Something broken that she recognized because she'd learned to hide her own broken pieces just as well. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment of collision would become the foundation of something neither had dared to hope for. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the ugliest encounters, and sometimes the people who challenge us most are exactly who we need to become who we're meant to be. The Ferrari sat gleaming in the afternoon sun, a silent witness to the moment when 2 hearts began a journey toward each other, even though they didn't know it yet. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the sounds of Manhattan traffic and the distant honking of taxicabs. Nathaniel stood frozen, his expensive phone still warm in his hand from where Zoe had touched it. The weight of his mortification pressed down on him like a physical force. You're Zoe Washington, he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. That's right. Her tone was professional now, stripped of any warmth. And you're the client with the failing hybrid system who just spent 10 minutes telling me I don't belong near your car. Nathaniel's internal monologue was a tornado of panic and shame. How could I have been so wrong? So cruel. She knew exactly what she was talking about, and the racist assumptions he'd made felt like acid in his stomach. But beneath the shame was something else, a desperate need for her help that he couldn't voice without admitting how completely he'd humiliated himself. I need. He started, then stopped, his usual commanding presence completely shattered. Zoe watched him struggle, and despite her anger, she felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. She'd seen this before, people so trapped in their prejudices that facing the truth left them completely lost. But she had a job to do, regardless of her personal feelings. Mr. Chun said this was urgent, she said, pulling out her phone to call her assistant. Marcus, cancel my afternoon appointments. I've got an emergency repair on 5th Avenue. Nathaniel finally found his voice. Look, what I said back there was inexcusable, Zoe finished for him, her dark eyes meeting his directly. But right now, that's not my concern. My concern is that you have a $500,000 vehicle with a hybrid system that's about to fail catastrophically. The question is whether you want me to fix it or whether you'd prefer to find someone else who meets your standards. The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Nathaniel felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, literally and figuratively. This woman held his prized possessions' fate in her capable hands, hands he just insulted for daring to touch his car. I need you to fix it, he admitted, the words feeling like swallowing glass. I have a crucial meeting tonight. The board of directors of Hartwell Industries. I'm trying to acquire their company. If I show up in anything less than this Ferrari, your image matters more than treating people with basic respect. Zoe's question was delivered with surgical precision. Nathaniel flinched. That's not. I didn't mean. What you meant was clear enough. She pulled a small diagnostic device from her purse, something that looked deceptively simple but cost more than most people's cars. The question now is whether you can set aside your prejudices long enough for me to do my job. She approached the Ferrari with the confidence of someone who belonged there, despite everything he'd said. Nathaniel watched, transfixed, as she connected the device to a port hidden beneath the dashboard. Her movements were precise, economical, those of a true expert. Your hybrid calibration is off by 12%, she said, reading the display. The electric motors aren't synchronizing properly with the V8. Keep driving like this, and you'll blow the entire powertrain within a week. How long will it take to fix? Nathaniel asked, his businessman's need for timelines reasserting itself. That depends on what I find when I get deeper into the system. Could be an hour, could be 6. She looked up at him with those penetrating dark eyes. The repair will need to be done in a proper facility. My workshop in Queens, or we can arrange for your building's garage if it has the right equipment. Nathaniel's mind raced. His building's garage was state-of-the-art, designed specifically for his collection. But the thought of this woman he'd so thoroughly insulted, working in his private space felt overwhelming. My building has everything you need, he heard himself say. Penthouse level. Full diagnostic equipment. Zoe nodded curtly. I'll need to drive the car there. In its current condition, you shouldn't be behind the wheel. You want to drive my Ferrari? The words slipped out before he could stop them, carrying an undertone of disbelief that made Zoe's jaw tighten. Mr. Brooks, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, I have driven more expensive vehicles than you've probably ever seen. Last month, I test drove a Koenigsegg Jesko after rebuilding its transmission. 2 weeks ago, it was a Bugatti Chiron Super Sport. Your Ferrari, beautiful as it is not going to intimidate me. Nathaniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. Every word out of his mouth seemed to dig him deeper into a hole of his own making. I didn't mean to suggest. Yes, you did. She held out her hand. Keys. He hesitated for a moment that felt like an eternity, then placed the Ferrari's key fob in her palm. Her fingers brushed his briefly, and he felt an unexpected jolt of electricity at the contact. She seemed unaffected, professionally focused as she climbed into the driver's seat. The engine came to life with a sound like controlled thunder. Nathaniel watched in amazement as she adjusted the seat and mirrors with the casual efficiency of someone completely at home in a vehicle worth $500,000. Through the windshield, he could see her checking the gauges, her face serious and concentrated. She rolled down the window. "I assume you can find your own way home?" Yes, of course." He felt ridiculous, standing on the sidewalk watching this woman commandeer his most precious possession. But as she pulled smoothly into traffic, handling the Ferrari with the same ease most people showed driving a Honda, he realized something that shook him to his core. She was magnificent. Nathaniel stood there for a long moment, watching the red blur of his Ferrari disappear into the Manhattan traffic, carrying with it a woman who had just turned his world completely upside down. His phone buzzed with notifications, missed calls from his assistant, urgent emails that needed responses, but he ignored them all. For the first time in years, possibly decades, Nathaniel Brooks found himself thinking about something other than money, power, or business acquisition. He found himself thinking about a pair of intelligent dark eyes that had seen right through his wealth to the small, prejudiced man beneath. As he hailed a taxi to follow his own car home, one thought echoed in his mind: what have I done? The ride to his building passed in a blur of self-recrimination and growing anxiety. Not anxiety about his car. Somehow, he had complete faith that Zoe Washington would treat it with the respect it deserved. No, his anxiety was about facing her again, about the inevitable hours they would have to spend together while she repaired the damage to his vehicle. The damage to his ego, however, might prove irreparable. When the taxi pulled up to his building, he could see his Ferrari already parked in the underground garage entrance, waiting. Zoe stood beside it, her diagnostic equipment laid out with military precision, talking on her phone with someone about parts and specifications. Even from a distance, she looked completely in command of the situation. Nathaniel paid the driver and walked toward his destiny, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether he could find some way to redeem himself in the eyes of the most remarkable woman he'd ever met. The point of no return had already passed. Now all that remained was to discover whether a man could truly change when confronted with the consequences of his own prejudice, and whether a woman with every right to hate him might somehow find it in her heart to see the possibility of something better beneath his flawed surface. Sometimes our worst moments can become the foundation for our greatest growth. What do you think it takes for someone to truly change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The garage elevator awaited, ready to carry them both toward a confrontation that would test everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The private garage on the 42nd floor was a temple to automotive excellence. Pristine white walls displayed vintage racing posters, while specialized LED lighting created perfect working conditions. Hydraulic lifts, diagnostic computers worth more than most people's homes, and tool cabinets that would make NASA jealous filled the space. But despite all its technological marvels, the garage had never felt smaller to Nathaniel than it did right now. Zoe moved through his sanctuary with the confidence of a master craftsman, her trained eye cataloging every piece of equipment. She nodded approvingly at the snap-on diagnostic station, ran her fingers along the computerized engine analyzer, and checked the specifications on the hydraulic lift system. Impressive setup, she admitted, her professional appreciation overriding her personal anger. Most private garages are just for show. This is actually functional. Nathaniel stood awkwardly by the elevator, still in his expensive suit, watching her transform his space into her workspace. I designed it myself. I wanted to be able to work on my cars, not just display them. You work on them yourself. There was genuine surprise in her voice as she began connecting her portable diagnostic equipment to the garage's power systems. I used to. His voice carried a note of sadness. When I was younger, before the company consumed everything. I haven't touched a wrench in probably 5 years. Zoe glanced up from her equipment setup, catching something vulnerable in his admission. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped, and he saw a flicker of understanding in her dark eyes. But it was gone almost immediately, replaced by cool efficiency. "Well, today you get to watch a professional work," she said, opening the Ferrari's hood. "Fair warning, this is going to take time. The hybrid system integration on these models is incredibly complex. Every connection has to be perfect, or the whole system fails." Nathaniel loosened his tie, the first informal gesture he'd made all day. "How long are we talking?" "Minimum 3 hours. Could be 5 or 6 if I find additional problems." She pulled on a pair of latex gloves with practiced efficiency. "The question is whether you can handle being in the same space as me for that long, without saying something else you'll regret." The directness of her challenge hit him like a physical blow. Nathaniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. When was the last time anyone had spoken to him with such unflinching honesty? "I deserve that," he said quietly. "Yes, you do." Zoe connected a cable to the Ferrari's main computer module, her movements precise and confident. But deserving something and learning from it are two different things. She activated her diagnostic system, and immediately the garage filled with the soft hum of electronic analysis. Multiple screens lit up showing engine parameters, electrical flowcharts, and system integration maps that looked like NASA mission control displays. "Wow," Nathaniel breathed, drawn closer despite himself. "I've never seen diagnostics this detailed." "Most mechanics can't afford equipment like this," Zoe explained, her tone warming slightly as she discussed her craft. "But when you're working on vehicles worth more than most houses, precision isn't optional, it's survival." As she worked, Nathaniel found himself genuinely fascinated. Her hands moved with surgical precision, disconnecting modules, testing connections, running analysis after analysis. Every movement was purposeful, economical, the result of years of training and natural talent. "There," she said, pointing to a readout on her largest screen. "See this voltage differential? The hybrid controller isn't receiving proper signals from the main engine management system. It's like having two orchestras trying to play the same symphony with different conductors." Despite everything that had happened between them, Nathaniel felt drawn into her explanation. What causes something like that? Could be anything. Faulty wiring, a corrupted software update, even vibration damage from aggressive driving. She gave him a pointed look. "Some people think expensive cars are indestructible toys instead of precision instruments." Nathaniel had the grace to look embarrassed. "I may have pushed it harder than I should have. Most of my clients do." Zoe began removing panels to access the hybrid controller, her movements efficient and sure. "They buy these cars for their egos, not their engineering. They want the status symbol, not the responsibility that comes with it." "Is that what you think I am? Just another ego-driven rich guy?" Zoe paused in her work, considering her answer carefully. "This morning, yes. That's exactly what I thought you were." She met his eyes directly. "The question is whether you're going to prove me right or surprise me." The challenge hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Nathaniel felt something stirring in his chest, not the familiar anger he usually felt when challenged, but something else. Something that felt almost like hope. "What would it take to surprise you?" "Start by treating me like a human being instead of a threat to your property." The simple request hit him harder than any business rival's attack ever had. Nathaniel realized that in his world of power lunches and board meetings, he'd forgotten how to have a genuine conversation with another person. Every interaction was strategic, calculated, designed to maintain his position of dominance. But here, in his own garage, watching this remarkable woman diagnose problems he couldn't even understand, he felt his usual armor of superiority cracking. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time, he meant it completely. "What I said to you outside the store, there's no excuse for it. I made assumptions based on." He struggled to find words that wouldn't make things worse. "Based on my skin color and my gender," Zoe finished for him, her voice matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Yes. The admission felt like confessing a sin. And I was completely, inexcusably wrong. Zoe continued working as she spoke, her hands never stopping their careful manipulation of delicate electronic components. Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and immediately have people assume you don't belong there? To have your expertise questioned before you even open your mouth? To prove yourself over and over again, only to have the next person make the same stupid assumptions. Nathaniel watched her work, really watched her. The precision of her movements, the quiet confidence in her voice as she explained complex systems, the way she handled his prized Ferrari with more care and skill than he'd ever shown it himself. "No," he said quietly. "I don't know what that's like. I've never had to prove anything to anyone except my own ambition." "Must be nice," she said, but there was less bitterness in her voice than he'd expected. "Is it?" Nathaniel surprised himself with the question. "Sometimes I think my money and power have made me less than I could be, less human." Zoe glanced up from the engine compartment, studying his face with new interest. "That sounds like something someone with a conscience would say." "I'd like to think I have one, though my behavior this morning suggests otherwise." For the first time since their disastrous encounter, Zoe's expression softened slightly. Recognizing the problem is the first step toward fixing it. "Is that your philosophy for engines or people?" "Both, actually." She smiled, just a small one, but genuine. Though engines are usually more cooperative about being repaired. Nathaniel found himself smiling back, and the expression felt foreign on his face. When was the last time he'd smiled at something other than a quarterly profit report? "Can I ask you something?" he said, emboldened by her slightly warmer tone. "Depends on the question. How did you become this incredible at what you do?" Zoe's hand stilled for a moment, and he saw her consider whether to trust him with something personal. "My father," she said finally. "He was a mechanic in Brooklyn. Not fancy cars like this, mostly fixing whatever people could afford to drive. But he taught me that every engine has a story, and if you listen carefully enough, it will tell you exactly what it needs. He must be proud of what you've accomplished." "He would have been." Her voice carried a note of sadness. "He died when I was 22. Heart attack. Never got to see me work on my first Ferrari." Nathaniel felt a stab of something he didn't immediately recognize. Sympathy? Regret? "I'm sorry. He always said I had magic hands. That I could feel what was wrong with an engine before the diagnostic equipment could tell me." She resumed her work, but her movements had become more thoughtful. "Sometimes I think he's still here, guiding my hands when I work on something really challenging." The intimacy of her confession caught Nathaniel off guard. Here was this woman he'd insulted and humiliated, sharing something precious and personal with him. The trust implied in that gesture felt heavier than any business contract he'd ever signed. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For telling me about him. For trusting me with something that matters to you." Zoe looked up, meeting his eyes directly. For a moment, the garage was silent except for the soft hum of diagnostic equipment and the distant sounds of the city far below. Something passed between them, not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of understanding. "Don't make me regret it," she said quietly. "I won't," Nathaniel promised, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. As Zoe returned to her work, Nathaniel found himself studying her with new eyes. Not as an obstacle to his plans or a threat to his assumptions, but as a remarkable woman who had built something extraordinary from nothing but talent, determination, and love for her craft. The garage, which had always been his private sanctuary, suddenly felt like it belonged to both of them. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Nathaniel Brooks didn't feel alone. The repair was far from over, but something more important than a Ferrari engine was beginning to heal in the careful space between them. 3 hours had passed in the pristine garage, and the space had transformed into something neither Nathaniel nor Zoe had expected, a place of genuine collaboration. Diagnostic screens cast blue light across their faces as Zoe worked deeper into the Ferrari's hybrid system, while Nathaniel found himself genuinely useful, holding components and following her precise instructions. "Hand me the number 7 Torx driver," Zoe said, her arm deep in the engine compartment. "And be careful, this connection controls the entire hybrid battery integration." Nathaniel selected the tool with careful precision, their fingers brushing as he passed it to her. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them, a moment of awareness that had nothing to do with automotive repair. "You're getting better at this," Zoe observed, focusing intently on her work to cover the moment of awkwardness. "Most clients just hover and ask if I'm done yet. Most clients probably don't find this as fascinating as I do." Nathaniel settled into a rolling chair beside the Ferrari, watching her work with genuine admiration. "I'd forgotten how satisfying it is to fix something with your own hands." Zoe emerged from the engine compartment, a small electronic module in her gloved hands. Her face was flushed from exertion, and small tendrils of hair had escaped her neat bun, giving her a softer appearance that made Nathaniel's chest tighten unexpectedly. "This is the problem," she announced, holding up the module. "The hybrid controller's firmware is corrupted. See these burn marks?" She pointed to tiny discolored spots on the circuit board. "This didn't happen from normal wear, this is from voltage spikes." "What causes voltage spikes?" "Usually aggressive acceleration patterns combined with sudden deceleration. The kind of driving that treats a precision instrument like a drag racer." She gave him a knowing look. "You weren't just pushing this car hard, you were punishing it." The observation hit closer to home than Nathaniel was comfortable with. Punishing it for what? Zoe set the module on her diagnostic table and began connecting it to a specialized computer. "That's what I'm wondering. In my experience, people don't abuse expensive toys unless they're working through something else entirely." The directness of her psychological assessment caught him off guard. Nathaniel found himself staring at the damaged component, seeing his own destructive patterns reflected in the burnt circuits. "How long will it take to repair this?" "I can't repair it," Zoe said, her fingers dancing across her computer keyboard. "This module is too damaged. But I can reprogram a replacement unit. The problem is, I only have one spare controller in my workshop, and it's not configured for this specific vehicle. So we're stuck." "Not stuck. Just extended." Zoe's screen filled with complex programming code. "I'll need to completely customize the firmware to match your car's exact specifications. That's going to take time, probably another 3 hours of very detailed work." Nathaniel glanced at his watch. It was already past 6 p.m., and the November sky outside had turned deep purple. "Will you stay? I mean, can you finish it tonight?" Something in his voice made Zoe look up from her computer. There was a vulnerability there that hadn't been present earlier, not just concern about his car, but something deeper. A reluctance to see her leave that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "I can stay," she said carefully. "But this kind of programming requires intense concentration. And honestly, I work better with some background noise. Do you mind if I play some music?" "Whatever you need." Zoe connected her phone to the garage's sound system, and soon the space filled with the smooth vocals of Alicia Keys. The music seemed to relax something in both of them, creating an atmosphere that felt less like a business transaction and more like companionship. As Zoe began the intricate process of programming the replacement module, Nathaniel found himself studying the vintage racing posters on his walls with new eyes. Most of them featured legendary drivers from the golden age of motorsports, men who had risked everything for the pure love of speed and precision. "You really do love cars," Zoe observed, following his gaze. "These aren't just decorations. You actually know these drivers' stories." "My father collected these posters," Nathaniel said, surprised by his own willingness to share. "He was obsessed with racing history." Used to tell me stories about Juan Manuel Fangio, Sterling Moss, Ayrton Senna. Used to. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, the weight of old pain settling around his shoulders like a familiar coat. He died when I was 16. Massive stroke. One day he was teaching me to change the oil in his old Mustang. The next day he was gone. Zoe's hands stilled on her keyboard. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was. Nathaniel moved to one of the posters, a black and white photograph of Fangio celebrating a victory in Monaco. But the worst part wasn't losing him. It was watching my mother's reaction. She sold his Mustang 3 weeks after the funeral. Said it was too painful to keep around. But it wasn't too painful for you? For me, it was the only thing that still felt like him. Nathaniel's voice carried the echo of a 16-year-old boy's heartbreak. I promised myself that when I had enough money, I'd buy cars that nobody could take away from me. Cars that would last forever. The confession hung in the air between them, and Zoe felt her perception of him shifting once again. This wasn't just about wealth or status. This was about a boy who had lost his father and spent 22 years trying to fill that void with objects that couldn't disappoint him or leave him behind. Is that why you were so angry when you saw me touching your Ferrari? She asked gently. It wasn't really about the car. Nathaniel leaned against his workbench, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained with honest work. Everything in my life feels temporary. Employees leave for better offers. Women leave when they realize I'm not as interesting as my bank account. Even my mother remarried and moved to Switzerland. He gestured around the garage. These cars are the only things that stay exactly as I want them to be. Except they don't, Zoe pointed out, holding up the damaged module. They break down, they need maintenance. They require care and attention from people who understand them. Like you. Like me. She returned to her programming, but her tone remained warm. You know, your father sounds like he was a good man. Teaching you to work with your hands, sharing his passion for mechanical beauty. He was the best man I've ever known. Nathaniel sat down again, closer to her this time. Sometimes I think I built my company as a monument to him, but then I look at what I've become. Cold, isolated, suspicious of everyone's motives, and I wonder if he'd even recognize me. Zoe saved her progress and turned to face him fully. Can I tell you something? When I first walked in here this morning, after what happened outside the store, I was ready to hate you. I had you categorized as just another entitled rich man who thinks money makes him better than everyone else. And now I see someone who's been running so hard from pain that he forgot how to stop and let people catch up with him. Her dark eyes held his steadily. Your father taught you to love beautiful machines, but somewhere along the way, you forgot his most important lesson. Which was that the most beautiful things in life require trust. You have to trust the car to perform, trust your skills to guide it, trust other people to share the road with you. Zoe's voice was soft but certain. You can't drive alone forever, Nathaniel. Eventually you crash. The use of his first name sent warmth through his chest. When was the last time someone had said his name with such gentle understanding? What about you? He asked. You seem to have your whole life figured out. Zoe laughed, but there was sadness in it. Hardly. I've spent so many years proving I belong in rooms full of men who don't want me there that I forgot how to trust anyone who actually does want me around. What do you mean? She hesitated, her fingers tracing patterns on her keyboard. I had a boyfriend 3 years ago. Another mechanic, actually. For 6 months, I thought he really saw me, not just the novelty of dating a woman who could rebuild an engine, but actually me. Her voice grew quieter. Then I found out he'd been taking credit for my work with his clients, telling them he was the real expert and I was just his assistant. That's horrible. The worst part was how stupid I felt for trusting him, for believing that someone could see past all the barriers I'd built and actually want to know the real me. She shook her head. Since then, I've kept things simple. Professional. Safe. Lonely, Nathaniel added quietly. Yeah, lonely. She met his eyes again. But lonely feels safer than betrayed. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared vulnerability settling between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. The garage felt intimate now, filled with more than just expensive cars and precision tools. It held the fragile beginnings of genuine connection. "Can I ask you something?" Nathaniel said. "Sure." "When you work on these cars, when you're deep in the diagnostics and programming, do you feel like you're having a conversation with them?" Zoe's face lit up with surprised pleasure. "Yes. Exactly like that. Every engine has its own personality, its own way of telling you what it needs. Most people think I'm crazy when I try to explain that. My father used to say the same thing about his Mustang. He claimed he could hear when something was wrong before any symptoms showed up. He was right. Machines are honest. They don't lie about what they need or pretend to be something they're not." Zoe returned to her programming with renewed energy. "Maybe that's why I prefer working on cars to dealing with most people." Most people. She glanced up, and for just a moment, her professional mask slipped completely. What Nathaniel saw underneath took his breath away. Intelligence, strength, vulnerability, and something else that made his heart race. "Most people," she confirmed softly. "But maybe not all people." The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility and the growing awareness that what was happening in this garage had nothing to do with automotive repair and everything to do with two damaged hearts beginning to recognize themselves in each other. Outside, Manhattan sparkled in the November darkness, 8 million people living their separate lives, unaware that 42 floors above the city, two souls were discovering that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can heal wounds you didn't even know you carried. The Ferrari sat silent and patient, its engine compartment open like a mechanical heart waiting to be healed. But the real repair work was happening between the two people working over it, two hearts learning that trust, like precision engineering, requires both courage and careful attention to detail. By 9 p.m., the garage had transformed into something neither Nathaniel nor Zoe had experienced in years, a space where two people worked in perfect harmony, their earlier walls replaced by an easy intimacy that surprised them both. The replacement module was nearly programmed, but neither seemed eager to rush toward completion. "Tell me about your first car," Zoe said, her eyes focused on lines of code while her voice carried genuine curiosity. "Not the first expensive one, the first one that mattered." Nathaniel was organizing tools with the methodical precision she taught him, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple task. A 1987 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles and a transmission that slipped in third gear. "Bought it with money for my summer job when I was 17. "What color?" "Rust. With patches of what used to be blue." He smiled at the memory. "My mother was mortified that her son was driving what she called a piece of junk, but I loved that car more than anything I've owned since." Zoe saved her progress and turned to face him, genuinely intrigued. "Why?" "Because I earned it. Every dent, every repair, every mile was mine." Nathaniel's expression grew thoughtful. "And because it was the last thing I did that my father would have been proud of. Working all summer, saving every dollar, learning to fix it myself when things broke. What happened to it? Traded it in for something more appropriate when I started my company. Biggest mistake I ever made." He paused in his organizing. "Sometimes I drive past used car lots hoping to see another 87 Civic, just to remember what it felt like to own something because I loved it, not because I could afford it." Zoe felt something tender unfurl in her chest. "My first car was a 1995 Nissan Sentra. Powder blue with a sunroof that leaked every time it rained. My dad and I spent 3 weekends replacing the engine seals." "You learned to work on cars from your father?" "He owned a small garage in Crown Heights. Nothing fancy, mostly oil changes and brake jobs for the neighborhood. but he was the best teacher I ever had. Her voice carried the warmth of cherished memory. He never once told me I couldn't do something because I was a girl. When other kids were playing with dolls, I was learning to diagnose transmission problems. He must be proud of what you've accomplished. Zoe's hand stilled on her keyboard, and Nathaniel caught the shadow that crossed her face. He died 4 years ago. Cancer. He never got to see me working on cars like this. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was. But you know what the hardest part was? Realizing that all those years, he'd been protecting me from how difficult this industry would be for someone like me. After he was gone, I faced the reality of being a young black woman in a field dominated by men who thought I was there for decoration. Nathaniel moved closer, setting down the tools he'd been organizing. Is that why you specialize in luxury vehicles? Less prejudice among wealthy clients. Actually more. But different. Zoe's laugh held no humor. Rich people are usually too polite to be openly racist to your face. They just dismiss you more quietly. Have you ever been the only person of your race in a room full of people who control your future? The question hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. No, I haven't. It's exhausting. You have to be twice as good to get half the recognition, and you can never, ever make a mistake because it confirms what they already suspect about you. Her voice carried the weight of years of fighting battles he'd never had to imagine. But when I fix something they can't, when I solve problems their expensive mechanics couldn't, for those moments, none of that matters. Only skill matters. Is that what happened today? When you fixed something I couldn't? Zoe met his eyes directly. Today was different. Today I watched someone who could have easily dismissed me actually listen to what I had to say. That doesn't happen often. The sincerity in her voice made Nathaniel's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. I almost did dismiss you. When you first walked in, I was so focused on my own assumptions that I nearly missed recognizing actual expertise. What changed your mind? You did. The way you handled my hostility with such grace, the way you saw through my anger to the real problem underneath. He paused, struggling with unfamiliar vulnerability. When was the last time someone really saw you? Not your accomplishments or your potential, but actually you. The question hung between them, more intimate than any physical touch. Zoe felt tears threaten, not from sadness but from the rare recognition of being truly understood. It's been a long time, she whispered. For me too. The admission created a moment of perfect stillness in the garage. Two people who had spent years building walls around their hearts suddenly found themselves in the presence of someone who made those walls feel unnecessary. Can I tell you something embarrassing? Nathaniel asked suddenly. Please do. When I saw you working on the Lamborghini in your workshop, the way you moved with such confidence and precision, it was the most attractive thing I'd seen in years. Not because it was unexpected, but because it was you being completely yourself. Zoe felt heat rise in her cheeks. That's not embarrassing. That's nice. The embarrassing part is that I spent the entire ride here trying to convince myself it was just professional admiration. And now, Nathaniel stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the honest scent of work and motor oil. Now I'm thinking that professional admiration doesn't usually make your heart race. Nathaniel. Her voice was barely audible. I know this is complicated. I know we started off terribly, and I know I have no right to feel what I'm feeling after how I treated you this morning. His blue eyes searched her face. But I can't pretend this is just about fixing a car anymore. Zoe's programming forgotten, she turned to face him fully. What are you saying? I'm saying that watching you work, listening to you talk about your father, seeing the way you handle challenges with such grace. You're extraordinary, Zoe. And not because you're a woman who can fix cars, but because you're you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in their implications. Zoe felt every protective instinct she developed over the years warring with a deep longing to trust this moment, to trust him. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of believing this is real. Of opening myself up to someone who might decide tomorrow that the novelty has worn off." Her voice trembled slightly. "I've been hurt before by men who thought I was interesting until I stopped being useful to them." Nathaniel reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and gently touched her hand. "I'm scared too. I'm scared of how much I want this to be real, how much I want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." "You don't have to be perfect, Nathaniel. You just have to be honest." "Then honestly? I haven't felt this connected to another person since my father died. You make me remember what it feels like to be seen for who I am rather than what I own." Zoe turned her hand palm up, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You make me feel like maybe letting someone in doesn't have to mean losing myself." They stood there in the intimate lighting of the garage, hands connected, hearts racing, the Ferrari forgotten as something far more important took shape between them. The city hummed 42 floors below them, but in this moment, they were the only two people in the world. "The module is almost finished programming," Zoe said softly, not wanting to break the spell but needing to acknowledge reality. "How much longer?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. "Good." Nathaniel's thumb traced gentle circles on her knuckles. "Because I'm not ready for this evening to end." "Neither am I." The confession was barely whispered, but it carried the weight of two hearts choosing courage over fear, connection over safety, possibility over protection. Outside, November snow began to fall, dusting the windows of the penthouse garage where two souls were discovering that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unlikely encounters, and sometimes the heart finds its home in the last place you'd ever think to look. The Ferrari's heart was almost healed, but the real repair work, two damaged souls learning to trust again, was just beginning. The gentle intimacy of the garage was shattered at 9:47 p.m. by the sharp ping of the elevator arriving at the penthouse level. Nathaniel and Zoe, who had been standing close together watching the final programming sequence, immediately stepped apart as voices echoed from the main living area. "Brooks, where the hell are you? We need to talk about the Singapore deal." Nathaniel's face went pale. "That's Harrison Blackwell and the board members. They weren't supposed to be here until tomorrow morning." The sound of expensive shoes clicking across marble floors grew closer. Zoe quickly moved back to her laptop, her heart racing with sudden anxiety. "Should I leave?" "No, just, let me handle this." But even as Nathaniel said it, she could see the transformation beginning in his posture, shoulders straightening, expression hardening into the cold mask she'd seen that morning. Three men in $1,000 suits entered the garage, their voices dying as they took in the scene. Harrison Blackwell, Nathaniel's business partner and oldest friend, was a silver-haired man in his 50s whose eyes immediately fixed on Zoe with barely concealed disdain. Behind him stood two board members, Robert Chun and William Morrison, both carrying the entitled bearing of men accustomed to having their assumptions confirmed. "Well, well," Harrison drawled, his gaze moving between Nathaniel and Zoe with obvious disapproval. "I can see why you've been unreachable all evening. Harrison, this is Ms. Washington. She's the mechanic who—" "The help is still here." Harrison interrupted, not even acknowledging Zoe's presence. "It's nearly 10 o'clock, Brooks. Surely whatever maintenance issue you had has been resolved by now." Zoe felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but what hurt more was watching Nathaniel's reaction. She could see him retreating into the safe space of his old self, the man who had yelled at her that morning. "The repair is complex," Nathaniel said stiffly. "It required extended time." "Complex?" Robert Chun laughed. "How complex can it be? It's just a car. Send it to the dealership tomorrow, and let's focus on real business." "Actually," Zoe said quietly, saving her work and beginning to pack her tools, "the programming is complete. The car should be fully operational now." The three men looked at her as if surprised she could speak. Harrison's expression turned even more condescending. "Nathaniel, surely you're not paying premium rates for..." He gestured vaguely at Zoe. "There are plenty of qualified mechanics who could have handled this during normal business hours." "She is qualified," Nathaniel said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried just minutes before. "I'm sure she's very skilled," William Morrison added with a smirk that made Zoe's skin crawl. "But this is hardly appropriate, having service staff in your personal space at this hour. What would the board think? What would investors think?" Zoe watched in growing hurt and disbelief as Nathaniel seemed to shrink under their judgment. The man who had just told her she was extraordinary, who had held her hand and shared his vulnerabilities, was disappearing before her eyes. "You're right," Nathaniel said finally, his voice taking on the cold, dismissive tone she remembered from their first encounter. "It has been an unusually long repair." The words hit Zoe like a physical blow. She closed her laptop with trembling hands, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. "Ms. Washington, thank you for your service. Please submit your bill through the usual channels." The clinical politeness was worse than his morning's anger. At least his rage had been honest. This careful dismissal, this reduction of everything they'd shared to a business transaction, felt like betrayal of the cruelest kind. "Of course, Mr. Brooks," Zoe managed, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. She shouldered her tool bag and picked up her laptop case. "The car is ready. The diagnostic will show all systems operational." She moved toward the elevator, each step measured and dignified despite the humiliation burning through her veins. As she passed the three men, Harrison stepped slightly into her path. "In the future, young lady, I'd suggest completing automotive work during normal business hours. Mr. Brooks is a busy man with important responsibilities." Zoe stopped and looked directly at him, her dark eyes flashing with controlled fury. "In the future, Mr. Blackwell, you might want to research who you're dismissing before you open your mouth. But then again, men like you rarely bother with facts when assumptions are so much more convenient." "Excuse me," Harrison sputtered. "Zoe." Nathaniel's voice carried a warning, but she was beyond caring about his comfort. "Did you know," she continued, addressing all three men with deadly calm, "that your friend here called every major auto service center in Manhattan today, and none of them could fix his car? Did you know that this Ferrari is one of only 5 like it in the world, and that I'm one of only 3 people on the East Coast certified to work on its hybrid system?" The men exchanged uncertain glances, but Harrison recovered quickly. "That's all well and good, but did you know that I've rebuilt engines for 3 Formula One teams, that I've restored classic Ferraris for the Peterson Museum, and that I charge $500 an hour because I'm worth every penny?" Her voice remained perfectly controlled, but the power behind it was unmistakable. "Or did you just see a young black woman and assume I was here for some other reason?" The silence that followed was deafening. Zoe looked directly at Nathaniel, and he saw in her eyes not just hurt, but the death of something precious. "The Ferrari is fixed, Mr. Brooks. I hope it serves you well." She paused at the elevator, her finger hovering over the call button. "For what it's worth, I thought you were different. I thought maybe you'd learn something today about not judging people by appearances." The elevator doors opened as if summoned by her disappointment. She stepped inside and turned to face them one last time. "Apparently, I was wrong." The doors closed with a soft whisper, leaving Nathaniel standing with his business associates in the suddenly hollow garage. The Ferrari sat there, purring softly, its heart repaired by hands that had also been mending his own damaged soul, until he'd chosen the familiar safety of his old prejudices over the terrifying vulnerability of real connection. "Well," Harrison said, breaking the silence, "that was unpleasant. Though I have to say, she certainly has spirit. Can we focus on Singapore now?" Robert asked impatiently. "This whole evening has been a waste of time." But Nathaniel barely heard them. He was staring at the spot where Zoe had stood just moments before, realizing that in trying to protect himself from his associates' judgment, he destroyed something infinitely more valuable than their good opinion. The Ferrari's engine hummed perfectly, but the sound felt like mockery now. She had given him back his prized possession, but in the process, he'd lost something far more precious: her trust, her respect, and possibly the only genuine connection he'd felt in years. "Brooks? Are you listening?" Harrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. Nathaniel looked at the three men, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Harrison with his casual racism dressed up as concern. Robert and William with their assumptions and their ignorance. These were his friends? These were the people whose opinions mattered more to him than the extraordinary woman who had just walked out of his life? "Get out," he said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my home. All of you. Now." "Nathaniel, what's gotten into you?" Harrison demanded. "We need to discuss." "Singapore can wait. This can't." Nathaniel moved toward the elevator, pressing the call button with desperate urgency. "I have to find her. I have to fix this." But even as the elevator climbed toward the garage, Nathaniel knew that some betrayals cut so deep that all the money in the world couldn't buy forgiveness. Some trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. The question was, had he realized it too late? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between fitting in and standing up for what's right? Sometimes the people we're trying to impress aren't worth the cost of disappointing ourselves. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're as heartbroken as I am right now, smash that subscribe button because we need to see if love can survive this kind of betrayal. The city glittered 42 floors below, indifferent to the human drama playing out in the penthouse above, where a man was learning that some mistakes can't be undone with money, and some hearts, once broken, require more than apologies to heal. The elevator seemed to take forever to reach the ground floor. Nathaniel paced the small space like a caged animal, his perfectly styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it, his expensive suit wrinkled from the evening's emotional turmoil. When the doors finally opened in the marble lobby, he burst out with desperate urgency. "Did you see which way the young woman went?" he asked the night doorman, a kind-faced man named Eduardo who'd worked the building for 15 years. "The lady in the green shirt? She took a taxi heading toward Queens about 10 minutes ago, Mr. Brooks." Seemed upset. Eduardo's expression showed genuine concern. "Everything all right, sir?" 10 minutes. She had a 10-minute head start, and in Manhattan traffic, that might as well be a lifetime. Nathaniel pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he scrolled through his contacts. He had the numbers of senators, celebrities, and world leaders, but he didn't have hers. Think, he muttered to himself, then looked up at Eduardo. "The Ferrari. She mentioned she works for exclusive auto services. Do you have a directory?" "Of course, sir." Eduardo quickly pulled up the information on his computer. "But sir, it's nearly 10:30 p.m. They'll be closed." Nathaniel was already dialing. The phone rang 4 times before a tired voice answered. "Exclusive auto, emergency line. This is Marcus." "This is Nathaniel Brooks. I need to reach Zoe Washington immediately. It's urgent." A pause. "Mr. Brooks? The Ferrari guy? Man, what did you do to her? She just called me crying, asking me to pick her up from some subway station in Manhattan. She never cries." The words hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. Zoe, the strong, confident woman who'd faced his anger with such dignity, was crying because of him. "Where is she? Please, I need to apologize. I need to make this right. Look, man, I don't know what went down up there, but Zoe's been hurt by enough rich guys who think they can treat her like garbage. Maybe you should just leave her alone." "No, you don't understand." Nathaniel stopped, realizing that Marcus was right to protect her. "I was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. But I think I'm falling in love with her, and I can't let her think that what those men said represents how I feel." Another pause. You're falling in love with her? Yes. And I know that sounds crazy because we just met this morning, but she's everything I didn't know I was looking for. She's brilliant and strong and real, and I threw that away because I was afraid of what some small-minded men would think. Damn. Marcus's voice softened slightly. She's at the 74th Roosevelt subway station in Queens. I'm about to pick her up. Wait. Please. Give me a chance to get there first. If she still doesn't want to see me after I apologize, I'll leave her alone forever. I promise. Nathaniel could hear Marcus thinking, man, you better not be playing games. Zoe deserves better than that. She deserves better than me, period. But I'm hoping she'll give me a chance to become the man worthy of her. All right. I'll tell her my car broke down, by you maybe 20 minutes. But Brooks? If you hurt her again, I don't care how much money you have. We clear? Crystal clear. And Marcus? Thank you. Nathaniel hung up and turned to Eduardo. I need my car. The Ferrari. Right away, sir. As Eduardo called for the Ferrari to be brought down from the garage, Nathaniel's phone buzzed with texts from Harrison. What the hell was that about? We need to talk. Don't let some woman mess with your head. The Singapore deal is worth $200 million. Call me. You're making a mistake. Nathaniel stared at the messages, then did something he'd never done before. He blocked Harrison's number, then Robert's, then Williams. One by one, he deleted the contacts of people who saw others as less than human. The Ferrari arrived, its engine purring like a contented cat. As Nathaniel slid behind the wheel, he caught sight of himself in the rear-view mirror. His tie was askew, his hair messed, his eyes wild with desperation. He looked nothing like the controlled billionaire who'd started this day. He looked human. The drive to Queens normally took 45 minutes, but Nathaniel made it in 25, the Ferrari's powerful engine eating up the distance between Manhattan and his second chance. His mind raced faster than the car, rehearsing apologies, trying to find words adequate for the magnitude of his betrayal. But every speech he practiced seemed hollow. How do you apologize for revealing that you're exactly the kind of man someone hoped you weren't? How do you ask for forgiveness when you've proven that your cowardice runs deeper than your claimed growth? The 74th Roosevelt subway station appeared ahead, its familiar blue and orange signs a beacon of hope and terror. Nathaniel parked illegally, not caring about tickets or consequences. For the first time in his adult life, money didn't matter. Status didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the woman he could see sitting alone on a bench outside the station entrance. Zoe had changed out of her emerald blouse into a simple gray sweatshirt, as if she wanted to disappear into the November night. Her head was down, and even from a distance, Nathaniel could see the dejected slope of her shoulders. She looked small and vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache with regret. He approached slowly, his expensive shoes clicking on the concrete. She looked up at the sound, and her expression cycled through surprise, hurt, and finally, a defensive hardness that cut him deeper than any anger could have. What are you doing here? Her voice was carefully neutral, but he could hear the exhaustion beneath it. I came to apologize. And to tell you that I'm an idiot. Well, at least you got one thing right tonight. She stood up, shouldering her bag. Marcus is coming to get me. You should go back to your important friends and your important business. I told them to leave. She paused, her hand tightening on her bag strap. What? I told them to get out of my home. All of them. Nathaniel took a careful step closer, as if approaching a wounded animal. After you left, I stood there listening to them talk about Singapore and quarterly reports, and I realized something. What? The word was barely a whisper. I realized that for the first time in years, I felt alive today. Really alive. And it wasn't because of money or deals or power. It was because of you. Because you saw something in me that I thought was dead. Zoe's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. And then you killed it. The moment those men walked in, you became exactly what I thought you were this morning. Exactly what I hoped you weren't. You're right. Completely right. Nathaniel's voice broke slightly. I spent so many years building walls to protect myself that when the moment came to choose between those walls and something real, I chose the walls. I chose safety over you, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. Why should I believe you? You had your chance, Nathaniel. You had the perfect opportunity to show me who you really are, and you chose to show me that you're just another rich man who cares more about what other rich men think than about treating people with basic human dignity. The accusation hung between them like a physical barrier. Nathaniel knew he deserved every word, but he also knew this might be his only chance to break through. You want to know who I really am? He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I just deleted every contact in here who thinks the way those men think. Harrison Blackwell, my business partner for 10 years. The board members who've helped build my company. Gone. He showed her the phone screen, nearly empty now of the contacts that had once defined his social circle. That Singapore deal they were talking about? It's worth $200 million to my company. I just walked away from the meeting that could have secured it because nothing is worth more than making this right with you. Zoe stared at the phone, then at his face. You deleted your business partners? I deleted people who couldn't see your worth. Who couldn't see that you're the most extraordinary person I've ever met. Nathaniel's voice grew stronger, more certain. You want to know what I learned today? I learned that I've been living half a life, surrounded by people who never challenged me to be better. You challenged me. In one day, you made me want to be the man who deserves to stand next to you. Nathaniel. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I proved that I'm exactly the kind of man you've learned to avoid. But I'm begging, for one more chance. Not because I think I've earned it, but because I think what we started today is worth fighting for. A taxi turned the corner, slowing as it approached the station. Zoe looked at it, then back at Nathaniel, her internal struggle visible in every line of her face. That's Marcus, she said quietly. Nathaniel felt his heart shatter. I understand. But as the taxi pulled up and Marcus rolled down the window, Zoe didn't move toward it. Marcus, she called out, her eyes never leaving Nathaniel's face. Give me 5 more minutes. Marcus looked between them, concern written across his features. You sure, Z? Yeah. 5 minutes. The taxi pulled away, leaving them alone under the harsh fluorescent lights of the subway entrance. Nathaniel felt a tiny spark of hope, fragile as a candle flame in a hurricane. Why? He asked simply. Zoe studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth written in his features. Because this morning, when you yelled at me, I saw a man controlled by fear and prejudice. Tonight, in your garage, I saw a man capable of growth and real connection. And just now, when those men walked in, I saw that scared man again. She took a step closer, and Nathaniel held his breath. But now, standing here, seeing you chase me to Queens, seeing you willing to sacrifice business relationships to apologize to me, I see something else. What do you see? I see a man at a crossroads. And I need to know, which man are you going to choose to be? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with the future they might or might not have together. Nathaniel looked into her eyes, seeing not just the pain he'd caused, but the hope she was still brave enough to offer him despite everything. I want to be the man who sees you clearly, who celebrates your brilliance instead of hiding from it, who stands beside you with pride instead of shrinking away in cowardice. His voice grew steady with conviction. I want to be worthy of the woman who fixed more than just my Ferrari tonight. Zoe's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That's what I want too. But Nathaniel, if I give you this chance, if I open my heart to this possibility, I need to know that you won't break it again the moment someone challenges you. Then let me prove it to you. Not with words, but with actions. Every day, for as long as you'll let me. She was quiet for so long that Nathaniel began to prepare himself for goodbye. But then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "One chance," she whispered. "One real chance. But if you ever make me feel small again, if you ever choose their approval over my dignity, it's over. Forever." "One chance is all I need," Nathaniel said, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "One chance to show you that love isn't about hiding who you are, it's about becoming who you're meant to be." As they stood there under the Queen's streetlights, holding hands beside his Ferrari, both of them knew that this moment was a beginning. Not the easy beginning of a fairy tale, but the hard-won beginning that comes after mistakes and forgiveness, after choosing love over fear. The road ahead wouldn't be simple. There would be more tests, more moments when they'd have to choose between the comfortable patterns of the past and the uncertain promise of something real. But for now, in this moment, they had each other's hands and the courage to try. Sometimes the most important choice we make is about who we choose to become when love asks us to be better than we are. Have you ever had to choose between what was easy and what was right? Share your story in the comments below. The Ferrari sat waiting beside them, its engine cooling in the November air, a symbol of the luxury that had defined Nathaniel's old life. But as he looked at Zoe, he realized that the real treasure wasn't made of carbon fiber and steel. It was standing right beside him, willing to believe in the man he was becoming. 3 months later, February 14th, Valentine's Day. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Washington Auto Restoration, casting golden light across the workshop floor where something magical was taking place. Nathaniel Brooks, dressed not in his usual Tom Ford suit but in navy blue coveralls that matched Zoe's bright red ones, carefully handed her a precision torque wrench. 35 Newton meters exactly, he said, his voice filled with the same reverence he once reserved for quarterly earnings reports. Zoe smiled as she accepted the tool, her movements graceful and sure as she made the final adjustment to the Ferrari's engine. "Perfect. You're getting good at this." The Ferrari SF90 Stradale, the same car that had brought them together in conflict, now sat between them as a symbol of their collaboration. But this wasn't the same arrogant billionaire who'd screamed at a stranger 3 months ago, nor was this the same guarded mechanic who'd built walls around her heart. Nathaniel had kept his promise in ways that amazed them both. He'd restructured his company, replacing toxic board members with diverse leaders who shared his new vision. He'd started a scholarship fund for young women entering automotive engineering, personally mentoring 3 students already. Most importantly, he'd learned to listen, really listen, not just to Zoe, but to the world around him with eyes newly open to his own privilege and responsibility. "Tell me again why we're working on Valentine's Day," he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and loved it. "Because," Zoe said, sliding out from under the car with a satisfied grin, "some things are more important than dinner reservations. And because this isn't just any Ferrari anymore." She was right. Over the past month, they'd been secretly modifying the car together, not for performance, but for purpose. Hidden in the trunk was a custom cooling system that would allow the Ferrari to serve as an emergency parts delivery vehicle for Zoe's new mobile mechanic service, bringing expert help to stranded drivers across the 5 boroughs. It was Nathaniel's idea, born from watching Zoe's face light up whenever she talked about making automotive expertise accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. He'd quietly funded the entire operation, but more importantly, he'd insisted on learning the technical side so he could be her partner in every sense of the word. "System test?" Zoe asked, wiping her hands on a clean rag. "System test," Nathaniel confirmed, moving to the computer terminal they'd installed. As the diagnostic program ran, confirming that every modification was perfect, Nathaniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. "What?" Zoe asked, noticing his expression. "Text from Marcus. He says, and I quote, 'If you two don't get out of that workshop and celebrate Valentine's Day like normal people, I'm staging an intervention.'" Zoe laughed, the sound filling the space with warmth. "He has a point." We've been working for 6 hours straight. Worth it, though. Nathaniel moved closer, still amazed by how natural it felt to be in her world. Besides, I like working with my hands. Turns out there's something incredibly satisfying about building something instead of just buying it. Look at you, getting all philosophical about manual labor, Zoe teased, but her eyes were soft with affection. The past 3 months hadn't been without challenges. There were moments when Nathaniel's old patterns resurfaced, when his instinct was to solve problems with money instead of understanding. There were times when Zoe's walls went back up, when trust felt too risky. But each time, they'd chosen to lean into the discomfort instead of away from each other. The real test had come 6 weeks ago, when Forbes wanted to do a cover story about their relationship. Nathaniel's old self would have either hidden Zoe away or used her as a prop to improve his image. Instead, he'd insisted that any story focus on her expertise and her new mobile service, positioning himself as the grateful student rather than the powerful businessman. You know what I love most about this? Zoe said, running her hand along the Ferrari's sleek hood. What? 3 months ago, this car represented everything that divided us. Your wealth, my assumptions about wealthy people, the way society teaches us to see each other as different species. She looked up at him, her dark eyes bright with emotion. Now it represents everything that brought us together. Passion for excellence, respect for craftsmanship, the willingness to get our hands dirty for something we believe in. Nathaniel reached for her hands, not caring that they were both smudged with honest grease. Can I tell you something? Always. That first day when I saw you touching my car, I was angry because I thought you didn't belong in my world. I was so wrong it's embarrassing. He brought her hands to his chest, over his heart. You didn't belong in my world. You belonged in a much better world, one where talent matters more than bank accounts, where character counts more than connections. The question was whether I was brave enough to join your world instead. Zoe felt tears prick her eyes. And I'm still learning. Every day, you teach me something new about what really matters. About seeing people clearly. About love that challenges instead of comforts, that pushes us to grow instead of letting us stay small. The workshop around them held the evidence of their journey, photos of successful repairs, thank you letters from customers they'd helped, the wall where Nathaniel had hung his framed Harvard MBA next to Zoe's ASE Master Technician certifications, declaring them equally valuable. I have something for you, Nathaniel said, reaching into his coveralls pocket. If it's an expensive piece of jewelry, I'm throwing a wrench at your head, Zoe warned, but she was smiling. Better. He pulled out a small velvet box, but instead of opening it, he handed her a folded piece of paper. Read this first. Zoe unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the official letterhead. Nathaniel, this is the deed to the building. I bought it from your landlord, but I'm signing it over to you. The workshop, the apartment upstairs, all of it. It's yours, free and clear, no matter what happens between us. Why would you? Because you should never have to worry about losing your space, your sanctuary, because of rent increases or gentrification or anything else. Because this place is where you shine brightest, and the world needs that light. He paused, his voice growing husky with emotion. And because I need you to know that my love for you isn't about possession or control. It's about protection and empowerment. Zoe stared at the deed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift. Not just the financial value, but what it represented: security, independence, respect for who she was and what she'd built. Now, Nathaniel said, taking back the paper and pulling out the velvet box, you can decide about this without any pressure, knowing that you're already complete and secure exactly as you are. He opened the box to reveal not a traditional diamond, but a stunning ring featuring a perfectly cut sapphire the exact color of motor oil, surrounded by tiny diamonds arranged to look like gear teeth. It was unique, unconventional, and absolutely perfect. Zoe Washington, he said, dropping to one knee right there on the workshop floor, you fixed more than my Ferrari. You fixed my heart, my perspective, my entire life. You taught me that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away. You showed me that true power isn't controlling others, but empowering them. Zoe's hands flew to her mouth as tears of joy spilled down her cheeks. I know I'm not perfect. I know I'll probably mess up again, probably say the wrong thing or fall back into old patterns. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life becoming worthy of your love, supporting your dreams, and building something beautiful together. He held up the ring, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner in every adventure, your student in every lesson, your teammate in changing the world one engine at a time? For a moment, the workshop was silent except for the distant hum of the city outside. Then Zoe dropped to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered, then louder, with joy flooding her voice. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. As Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger, both of them laughing and crying at the same time, the Ferrari's engine gave a spontaneous purr, as if the car itself was celebrating their union. You know what this means, Zoe said, admiring the ring that caught the workshop lights like captured starlight. What? You're going to have to learn how to change your own oil. I don't marry men who can't maintain their own vehicles. Nathaniel laughed, pulling her into his arms. Lucky for me, I have the best teacher in the world. As they kissed there on the workshop floor, surrounded by the tools and dreams that had brought them together, car alarms began going off outside, a symphony of horns and sirens that sounded suspiciously like celebration. Sounds like the whole neighborhood approves, Zoe murmured against his lips. Just wait until they find out about the mobile service launch next month. We're going to revolutionize automotive care in this city. We, Zoe repeated, loving the sound of it. I like that word. 6 months later, their wedding took place not in some exclusive venue, but right here in the workshop, surrounded by the cars they'd restored together and the community they'd built. Marcus served as Zoe's man of honor, while Nathaniel's best man was Miguel, a teenager from the Bronx whose scholarship had led him to study automotive engineering at MIT. The guest list was a beautiful mixture of billionaires and mechanics, society figures and students, all united by the couple's shared commitment to breaking down barriers and building bridges. Harrison Blackwell wasn't invited, but 3 of Nathaniel's former business partners attended, the ones who'd supported his transformation and joined his new venture capital fund focused on supporting minority-owned businesses. As they exchanged vows beneath a canopy of vintage car parts welded into an artistic arch, Nathaniel promised to love Zoe's strength, support her dreams, and never again let fear silence his integrity. Zoe promised to trust his growth, believe in their future, and help him continue becoming the man his heart knew he could be. The Ferrari, now painted with the logo of Washington Brooks Mobile Auto Service, served as their getaway car, driving them not to some exotic honeymoon destination, but to their first official call, a broken-down school bus full of kids from a local community center who needed to get to their field trip. Because that's who they'd become together, people who measured success not in dollars accumulated, but in problems solved, barriers broken, and hearts healed. As they worked side by side to get the bus running, their wedding clothes protected by matching coveralls, Zoe caught Nathaniel's eye and smiled. Any regrets? She asked. He looked at her, brilliant, beautiful, brave Zoe who'd seen past his worst to believe in his best, then at the cheering children whose day they just saved, then at the ring on his finger that marked him as belonging to something bigger than himself. Just one, he said, tightening a bolt with perfect precision. What's that? I regret that it took me 38 years to learn that the best things in life can't be bought. He stood up, pulling her into his arms as the children cheered their success. But they can be earned, one honest day at a time, by someone brave enough to love you. The February sun set over Queens, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. Somewhere in Manhattan, another arrogant billionaire was probably yelling at someone for touching his car. But here, in this moment, love had won. Growth had triumphed over fear. And two hearts that had started the year as strangers had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are reached by taking the longest possible route home. The workshop lights dimmed as the happy couple drove away in their newly christened service vehicle, ready to answer the next call, fix the next problem, and prove every day that when love and purpose align, even the most impossible dreams become beautifully, wondrously real. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.